A young woman went to a party with her friends and vanished without a trace. Police launched a search, but they couldn't find her. From the very beginning, there were plenty of suspicious leads and potential suspects, but the truth kept slipping through their fingers. The case dragged on for 30 years, until a twist no one saw coming changed everything. Pamela Pitts was born on June 25, 1969, in the Forsyth Township, Michigan. Her father was in the military, and after she was born, he and his wife went on to have 3 more children. For a while, the family lived on a nearby Air Force base, before eventually settling in Prescott, a quiet town in Arizona. Pamela was friendly, outgoing, and had no trouble making new friends. One of her favorite things was her CB radio, a popular gadget amongst teens at the time. It allowed people to chat with friends or strangers, and every user had a nickname. Pamela went by Dark Angel. At 19, she moved out of her parents' place and got a house with her best friend and another roommate. Around that time, she also started dating a guy named Bobby. Pamela had big plans for the future. She wanted to go to college and start a career in the beauty industry. But before diving into that, she got a job as an accountant at a local restaurant. She clicked with the team right away and ended up loving it. On September 14, 1988, 19-year-old Pamela decided to visit her parents. That evening, they talked about plans for the upcoming weekend. She was planning to spend Saturday with them and bring some laundry over to wash. When Saturday rolled around, her parents waited all day, but Pamela never showed. She didn't come on Sunday either, not even a phone call. Still, they didn't panic just yet. They figured maybe her plans had changed and decided to wait a little longer. That same day, Pamela's roommate, Shelley, called her father, Paul, to ask if Pamela happened to be at their house. She said she hadn't seen her since the night before. Pamela had gone out and never come back. At first, Paul didn't think much of it. He figured Pamela might have stayed over at a friend's place. But the next day, he decided to call the restaurant where she worked just to check in. That's when he found out she hadn't shown up for her shift. She hadn't even called to let anyone know. That was completely out of character. Pamela never missed work and was always on time. Her father started to worry and eventually made the decision to contact the police. Detectives quickly got involved in the search and started by checking Pamela's house. Inside, they found all of her personal belongings, including her purse and driver's license, still in her room. Her car was also parked out front. At the same time, they spoke with Pamela's roommate, Shelley. She told them she hadn't seen Pamela since Friday night. According to her, Pamela had gone to a party in the woods on the edge of town with some friends and never came back. But there was one more strange detail. Pamela and Shelley shared a joint bank account they used to save up for rent. And shortly before she disappeared, Pamela had withdrawn all the money from that account without telling Shelley a word. The forest where Pamela had gone for the party had a bad reputation amongst locals. It was a popular hangout spot for teens and college kids who wanted to drink away from adult supervision. And from time to time, those parties turned violent. With serious consequences. Just a few years before Pamela disappeared, there was a fight in that same forest between 2 young men. One pulled a knife, killed the other, and ended up with a 10-year prison sentence. Police interviewed Pamela's friends, who had been with her at the party. They said she wandered off into the woods for a few minutes, but never came back. As strange as it was, they assumed she just decided to head home and didn't think much of it at the time. Detectives also spoke with her family, co-workers, and other acquaintances, but no one had any idea where Pamela could have gone. In the days that followed, police continued trying to track her down, but every lead went cold. That all changed on September 29th, 13 days after Pamela went missing. A couple of locals were walking through the woods, not far from the area where those parties were usually held, when something strange caught their eye. Sticking out from a pile of trash near a roadside dump was what looked like part of a body. As they got closer, they realized it was a badly burned human corpse lying among the garbage bags. They immediately ran to the nearest payphone and called the police. When officers arrived, they realized the body was so badly charred it couldn't be visually identified. There were no documents or personal belongings, just one thing that had survived the fire: a metal bracelet on the victim's wrist engraved with 2 words, Dark Angel. To confirm the identity, the medical examiner got dental records from a local clinic, and that's how they finally confirmed what everyone had feared. The body belonged to Pamela Pitts, the young woman who'd been missing for nearly 2 weeks. The medical examiner couldn't determine Pamela's exact cause of death because her body was too badly burned, but they did uncover one disturbing detail. It appeared she had been killed well before her body was set on fire. Police also began to suspect that more than one person was involved. The way the crime was carried out suggested multiple people had played a role. First, the victim was murdered. Then, her body was hidden for a period of time, probably weeks, before it was burned and dumped at the roadside landfill. With the case now officially classified as a homicide, police shifted their focus to finding out who was responsible. Their first suspect was Pamela's boyfriend, Bobby. During an interview with detectives, he said the last time he saw Pamela was the night she disappeared, at the party in the woods. According to Bobby, he had to leave early for his night shift, so he said goodbye and took off. He also mentioned that Pamela didn't have any other plans and was supposed to head home after the party. Detectives checked his alibi and confirmed that he really had been at work that night, so they crossed Bobby off the suspect list and kept digging for answers. Detectives then spoke with Pamela's 2 housemates, who confirmed she never came home that night. The police also decided to verify both of their alibis, and that's when things got a little interesting. The first roommate, Jeremy, had been at a football game, then spent the rest of the night out with friends, who backed up his story. As for Pamela's friend, Shelley, she said she'd finished work late that evening, then met up with her boyfriend, Raymond. The two went to hang out at a friend's place, and according to her, they got back to his house sometime after 3 a.m. Shelley claimed she couldn't fall asleep, so she got in her car and just drove around the city until 7 in the morning. That story raised some eyebrows. Detectives paid a visit to Raymond to confirm the timeline, but he told them they actually got home closer to 11:30 p.m., not 3 a.m. When they pointed out the inconsistency, Raymond said it had been over 2 weeks ago, and he just didn't remember the exact time. Still, detectives weren't ready to just take his word for it. They asked him to take a polygraph, and he agreed. The results showed no signs of deception in his answers. So, for now, investigators gave him the benefit of the doubt, assuming he might have genuinely misremembered. During those conversations, detectives got another potential lead from Shelley. She mentioned that shortly before Pamela disappeared, she had been having money troubles. She was struggling to cover her share of the rent, and had even talked about possibly moving back in with her parents. Combined with the fact that Pamela had drained their shared bank account just before vanishing, it made detectives wonder if there might be a financial motive behind her death. But soon, they got a far more disturbing lead. One of Pamela's friends came forward and told police about a man who had been bragging about killing her. This guy claimed to be a Satanist and said he had attacked Pamela with an ice pick, then performed some kind of sacrificial ritual. Police tracked the guy down, but he denied having anything to do with the murder. Detectives couldn't find a single piece of evidence linking the self-proclaimed Satanist to the crime, and they started to doubt he had any real connection to Pamela's death. The biggest red flag was the lack of any wounds on her body that matched an ice pick, and when you added in the whole ritual story, it sounded less like a confession and more like something he just made up. Not long after, police got another lead. A witness who'd been at the party told them about a girl named Melinda, someone who might have had a reason to go after Pamela. According to him, Melinda had a reputation for getting into fights and a temper that could go off at any moment. He said the two got into a heated argument that night, and it ended with Melinda beating Pamela up. Detectives brought Melinda in for questioning, but she denied everything. In fact, she said she hadn't even been at the party that night. Still, police weren't convinced. They reached out to the district attorney, who arranged for a formal sworn hearing. With several people who had attended the party once again, she insisted she wasn't there and claimed she had been at a local hotel with a small-town band, but no one could confirm her story. Multiple witnesses, on the other hand, said they were sure they'd seen her at the party. With mounting suspicions against Melinda, detectives finally had enough to charge her, and 4 months later she was arrested for perjury, but she didn't spend long behind bars. 10 months after her arrest, Melinda was released because police simply didn't have enough evidence to charge her with Pamela's murder. It's worth mentioning that as soon as she was freed, Melinda left the state and never returned to her hometown. From that point on, the case hit a dead end, and with no other solid leads, it eventually went cold. But everything changed a few years later, thanks to a discovery no one saw coming. On May 25, 1991, a group of students exploring an old abandoned mine near Prescott stumbled upon something horrifying at the bottom: a man's body. He had been wrapped inside the lining of a waterbed, and based on the level of decomposition, it looked like he'd been dead for several weeks. Medical examiners identified the man as Raymond Clerks, Shelley's boyfriend, the same Shelley who had lived with Pamela. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Detectives working Pamela's case immediately jumped into action. Was it just a coincidence? Or could there be a connection? They looked into Raymond's last days and learned that, in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, his family had been trying to get in touch with him, but he wasn't answering his phone. Shelley told them he had left town on some business and hadn't returned yet. That explanation held, until Raymond missed a close family member's wedding. That's when his relatives knew something was seriously wrong. After confirming his identity, detectives launched a full investigation into Raymond's murder, starting with the person closest to him, Shelley. When they questioned her, she claimed she had no idea where Raymond was and said she was just as worried as everyone else. But while they were speaking with her at the house, officers noticed something strange, what looked like dried bloodstains leading toward the garage. They followed the trail and entered the garage, where they saw Shelley's car. As soon as they got closer, they were hit by the overwhelming smell of decomposition coming from the vehicle. A closer look revealed that the entire trunk was stained with blood, and lab tests later confirmed it belonged to Raymond. Under the front seat, detectives also found a handgun. Forensic testing showed it was the exact caliber used to kill him. Police immediately arrested Shelley, though she continued to deny any involvement in Raymond's murder, but the evidence kept piling up. Investigators examined tire tracks near the abandoned mine where the body was found, and they matched perfectly with the tires on a pickup truck Shelley had borrowed from a close friend just days earlier. On top of that, a flashlight was recovered from the bottom of the mine, and Shelley's fingerprints were all over it. Despite the mounting evidence, Shelley refused to confess. For 2 years, she held her ground, while prosecutors built their case and prepared for trial. Then, just before things went to court, Shelley finally broke and agreed to tell detectives what really happened to Raymond. Shelley told detectives she and Raymond had been dating for several years. During that time, he'd been training to become a commercial pilot. After finally getting his license, Raymond decided he wanted to move to California to pursue a job, and taking Shelley with him wasn't exactly part of the plan. He told her he wanted to break up, and even said he was taking their dogs with him. According to Shelley, their final conversation happened while they were out of town. The two were lying on the roof of a car watching planes fly overhead, heartbroken over Raymond's decision to leave her behind in Arizona. Shelley said she pulled out a gun and shot him in the head, but even with her confession, detectives weren't convinced. All the evidence suggested Raymond had been killed at their home, not in some remote area. Forensic evidence pointed to him being shot inside the house, then kept in the trunk of Shelley's car for nearly 2 weeks. After that, she borrowed a friend's pickup truck, loaded his body into it, and dumped it in the abandoned mine. There was one more thing that didn't sit right with detectives. They didn't believe Shelley could have done all of this on her own. They suspected someone had helped her, but she refused to name anyone else, sticking to her version of the story. Still, in the end, Shelley was sentenced to 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Naturally, the detectives working Pamela's case started to seriously wonder if Shelley had something to do with her murder too. But she kept denying it, and there was still no solid evidence tying her to the crime. So, just like that, Pamela's case went cold once again. After Shelley's arrest, Raymond's father started supporting Pamela's family. He even offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could help solve her murder. Detectives also publicly promised full immunity to anyone who may have helped cover up the crime. They came forward and told the truth, but no one did. In the years that followed, investigators kept revisiting Pamela's case, hoping to find new clues, but every lead they chased ended in a dead end. That continued for 20 years until 2011, when Shelley was released from prison. She moved to a small town in Nevada, got a job as an accountant, and eventually got married. From then on, she lived a quiet, low-profile life. Neighbors described her as upbeat, kind, and friendly. But behind the scenes, investigators still believed she'd gotten away with murder, and they hadn't stopped looking for evidence. By that time, Pamela's case had been handed over to a new detective. He decided to go back to square one and review every piece of evidence from the beginning. And surprisingly, he uncovered several overlooked details that raised serious red flags about Shelley. Multiple people interviewed back then recalled that on the night Pamela vanished, Shelley had been driving around town looking for her. When friends asked what was going on, Shelley reportedly told them, straight up, that she was going to kill Pamela. Others claimed Shelley had bragged about knowing how to get away with murder, saying that the key was to make someone disappear for a few weeks, then either burn the body or dump it in a mineshaft. But as suspicious as it all sounded, it still wasn't enough to hold up in court. So, the detectives reached out to the prison where Shelley had served her sentence and requested every single recorded phone call she'd made during her time behind bars. Most correctional facilities in the U.S. record inmate phone calls, and it was one of those recordings that finally gave investigators what they'd been hoping for. In a call shortly after Shelley was questioned about Pamela's case, her father asked if she was worried about getting arrested once she got out. He made it clear he was referring to the night Pamela disappeared. Shelley paused for a moment, then admitted there was one big thing that could land her back in prison. But she didn't go into details. Even though it wasn't a smoking gun, it was enough for investigators to make a move. They brought the recording to the prosecutor, and after reviewing everything, he gave the green light. On June 4, 2017, Shelley, now 50 years old, was arrested once again. But this time it was for the murder of Pamela Pitts. With no clear-cut physical evidence linking Shelley to the crime, the prosecutors faced an uphill battle. Her defense team immediately filed a motion to block any mention of Raymond's murder, arguing that it had nothing to do with Pamela's death. Prosecutors, on the other hand, believed it was highly relevant, pointing out the disturbing similarities between the two cases. Both victims had lived with Shelley, both had disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and both had ended up dead. In the end, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, saying the jury couldn't be told that Shelley had once been convicted of killing her boyfriend. And without that key piece of context, the prosecution's case suddenly looked a whole lot weaker. There were other unexpected problems, too. Many of the key witnesses had either passed away or couldn't recall details clearly after all those years. To make matters worse, Shelley's attorneys pointed out that the medical examiner had never been able to determine Pamela's exact cause of death. They argued that it was possible she died from natural causes, or that some kind of accident had happened. In the end, it took 4 years just to prepare for trial, and eventually the prosecution made a highly controversial decision. They offered Shelley a plea deal. If she agreed to plead guilty to Pamela's murder, the time she'd already served for killing Raymond would count toward her sentence, and she'd be released from custody immediately, walking straight out of the courtroom a free woman. Pamela's parents didn't like that idea, but still agreed to the deal. After decades of waiting, they just wanted the truth. Chance a jury could find Shelley not guilty, and if that happened, the case might never be solved. So, in March 2021, Shelley took the deal and finally told investigators what happened that night. Pamela and Shelley had been best friends, living together in the same house. Both of them weren't, but even with their combined income, they were barely scraping by. So they invited a third roommate to help split the rent. But even that didn't fix things, and after a few months, Pamela told Shelley she was planning to move out and go back to live with her family because she just couldn't afford it anymore. That news hit Shelley hard. She didn't get along with her own parents and had no idea where she'd go in that case. And without Pamela, there was no way she could keep up with the rent. On the night of the murder, Shelley found out that Pamela had emptied their shared bank account, and she lost it. Furious, she jumped in her car and started driving around, looking for Pamela, thinking to herself that if she found her, she might just kill her. She eventually tracked Pamela down at a party in the woods. The two stepped away from the crowd to talk, and that's when Shelley snapped. She punched Pamela in the face, and when she fell to the ground, Shelley kept hitting her until she stopped breathing. Other people at the party were only a few dozen feet away, so Shelley had to act fast. She pretended they were just goofing around, laughing out loud and making fake conversation every time she heard footsteps nearby. Shelley claimed she just couldn't handle the feeling of betrayal from someone she considered her closest friend. That's how she saw Pamela's decision to leave and take all the money with her. The anger, the hurt, the sense of being abandoned. It all exploded in that one moment of blind rage. And she made a terrible mistake. According to her, it was the same kind of emotional spiral that led to Raymond's murder when he told her he was moving to California and taking their dogs with him. That's where her confession ended. Under the terms of the plea deal, she wasn't required to say anything beyond the act of the killing itself. But detectives still believe she didn't act alone. Someone, they suspected, had helped her move the body out of the woods, and later burn it. Right after her confession, Shelley was released from court and returned to Nevada, where she went back to working as an accountant and living with her husband. And just like that, the case of Pamela Pitts was officially closed. But detectives still couldn't shake the feeling that Shelley hadn't acted alone. They suspected someone helped her get rid of the body, possibly Melinda, the woman who'd clashed with Pamela that night. Still, without a confession, it was nearly impossible to prove. It also remained unclear whether Pamela had really emptied their shared account, or if she had just withdrawn her own share since she wasn't planning to stay. Given how much Shelley had twisted the details of Raymond's murder in her confession, detectives suspected she might not be telling the truth about Pamela either. Even though Pamela's parents agreed to the plea deal, the outcome left a bitter aftertaste. They admitted they would have preferred to see Shelley behind bars for the rest of her life, but understood that wasn't realistic. Her father later told reporters, "This woman has been convicted of murder twice. If I were her husband, I'd sleep with one eye open." A girl from a small town went out trick-or-treating on Halloween and vanished without a trace. The case immediately grabbed national attention, and over the next few days, more than 5,000 people joined the search. But despite the massive investigation, police couldn't solve the mystery. That is, until they stumbled onto a completely unexpected twist that finally revealed what happened. And the truth shocked everyone. Lisa Ann French was born on June 2, 1964, in Wisconsin. When she was young, her parents got divorced, and she moved with her mom to the small town of Fond du Lac. A few years later, her mom remarried, and Lisa became a big sister to a younger brother. By 1973, Lisa was 9 years old, a typical kid attending her local elementary school, active in the Girl Scouts, and spending most of her free time playing outside with friends. That October, Lisa was buzzing with excitement about Halloween, or more specifically, about collecting as much candy as possible from the neighbors. She'd originally planned to dress as a butterfly, but the late October weather turned chilly, forcing her mom to improvise. She pieced together a last-minute costume using clothes from around the house, including an oversized black hat, and sent Lisa out to trick-or-treat. Lisa had planned to go out trick-or-treating with a friend, but that evening she got grounded and had to stay home. So, Lisa set out alone, though her mom warned her not to stray too far from their house. Their neighborhood was considered safe, and Lisa's parents knew everyone within a several-block radius. Plus, other kids and parents were out that night, so her mom wasn't too worried. Lisa was also looking forward to a Halloween party thrown by neighborhood parents. That year, news reports had sparked panic across the country about candy tampering, stories of hidden razor blades, and even poison in treats. To ease fears, the community decided to host a controlled, safe environment for the kids. Lisa left home around 6 p.m., promising to return by 7. But when she didn't come back, her mom started to worry. At first, she figured Lisa had gotten carried away trying to collect as much candy as possible. But when the clock hit 8 p.m., she decided to go look for herself. She combed the nearby streets, but there was no sign of her daughter. Frantic, she asked everyone she passed if they'd seen Lisa. Word of the disappearance spread fast through the neighborhood, and soon some neighbors joined the search, but no one could find a trace of her. Eventually, her mom decided to call the police. Officers swarmed the area, and soon dozens of people were out searching, with the crowd growing by the hour. Investigators learned Lisa had only stopped at 2 houses that night, a classmate's and a teacher's. After that, she simply disappeared. This only deepened the fear. Both homes were just minutes from her own, meaning something could have happened almost immediately after she left. The search lasted all night, but turned up nothing. By morning, even more locals joined the effort, and police expanded the hunt citywide. Soon, national news picked up the story. For many, Halloween was supposed to be fun, a night of kids laughing and collecting candy, just like Lisa. Now, her disappearance felt like a collective nightmare, and thousands now wanted answers. The second day of searching turned up nothing, but police weren't ready to give up. They printed thousands of flyers with Lisa's photo, and volunteers plastered them across the town and beyond. Local gas stations even offered free gas to search volunteers, whose numbers eventually swelled to over 5,000 people. They combed every street, forest, field, and river, anywhere Lisa might be. Volunteers on horseback and ATVs scoured remote areas, but no one could find her. Days passed until a call came in on November 3rd, 3 days after Lisa vanished. A farmer driving through the small town of Taikita, just 3 miles from Lisa's home, spotted 2 trash bags by the roadside. Like everyone else, he'd heard about the missing girl, so he decided to check the bags, just in case. What he found horrified him. Inside one bag was Lisa's body. The other held her clothes. The farmer rushed to the nearest phone and called the police. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. By the time officers arrived, dozens of locals had gathered at the scene, all in shock over the grim find. Investigators confirmed the body was Lisa's and sent it to the medical examiner, who established she'd been sexually assaulted. Initially, they thought the cause of death was strangulation, but later determined she'd actually died from shock. Back in 1973, DNA testing wasn't a thing yet, so detectives had to rely on whatever physical evidence they could find. Forensics went through all of Lisa's clothes, picking up stray fibers that seemed out of place. They also found a single hair, but there wasn't a single fingerprint. Not on her clothes, not on her body, and not even on the trash bags the killer used to dump her remains. News of the brutal murder didn't just shake their small town. It spread across the whole country. People were outraged, demanding the police catch the killer as soon as possible. Parents were terrified and scared for their own kids' safety. Lisa's funeral took place 3 days after her body was found. Thousands of people showed up for the service, so many that the organizers had to set up multiple lines just to let everyone say their goodbyes. Meanwhile, the police were doing everything they could to track down the killer. With no solid leads, they focused on retracing Lisa's steps that night. 2 families told investigators she'd stopped by their houses for candy, and after that, she just vanished. That meant something had to have happened almost immediately after she left the second house. From their investigators considered 2 possibilities: either a stranger saw Lisa outside and lured her away, or she knocked on another door for candy, and someone who lived there attacked her. The first theory didn't seem likely. Lisa wasn't the kind of kid to go off with a stranger or to hop into a random car. And none of the neighbors reported hearing screams or seeing anything suspicious. That made the second theory seem much more likely. Investigators went door to door, questioning everyone on the street. There were dozens of houses, but every single resident claimed Lisa hadn't stopped by. With no immediate leads, detectives started looking closer at each household, trying to narrow down possible suspects. They ruled out houses where only women were present, and also eliminated the ones Lisa had already passed before visiting her teacher and classmate. They also knew Lisa had only been knocking on doors of families she knew well. She was familiar with most of her neighbors, but wasn't close with all of them. So, the police asked her mom who else on that street might Lisa have felt comfortable visiting. She gave them a few names, but one in particular stood out. A little further down the street lived a 24-year-old man named Gerald Turner. He shared a home with his girlfriend and their young daughter. There were several reasons why Turner caught the police's attention. First, Lisa knew him well. He and his family had previously lived in a duplex with Lisa's family right on the other side of the wall. Their families interacted all the time, and Lisa often ran over to play with his daughter. She also talked to Turner himself quite a bit. She would excitedly bring him new things her parents had bought for her, and he always seemed happy to listen. The second reason had to do with his behavior when police questioned everyone in the neighborhood. He didn't show any obvious signs of guilt, but something about his responses fell off. The detectives couldn't put their finger on it, but his answers just didn't sit right with them. The third reason came to light a little later. Investigators had a pretty clear timeline of when Lisa was attacked, just minutes after she left the last house. And during that exact window, Turner was home alone. His girlfriend and their kid were at a Halloween party, which meant he had the perfect opportunity to commit the crime before they got back. With all this information, Turner seemed like the most likely suspect out of everyone on that street, but proving his guilt was a whole different story. Police questioned him multiple times, but he kept denying any involvement. Eventually, they asked if he'd take a polygraph test, and Turner agreed. During the test, the examiner flagged some of his answers to key questions as inconclusive. Detectives tried to use that to pressure him into confessing, but he wouldn't budge. Later, they asked him to take another test. This time, he flat out refused. With no confession, investigators turned back to the limited physical evidence they had. As we know, forensic experts had found a few stray fibers on Lisa's body and clothing along with a single human hair. After analyzing it, they conducted the hair most likely wasn't from someone's head, it was from the killer's body, so police obtained a warrant to search Turner's house and collect hair samples from him in his bedroom. They immediately took note of the bedspread because it was the same color as the stray fibers found on Lisa's clothing. When forensic experts examined it more closely, they confirmed that the fibers could have come from this blanket, but proving it with absolute certainty just wasn't possible. The hair sample was another frustrating piece of evidence. In color, but without DNA testing, there was no way to prove a definitive match. Still, these findings only deepened their suspicions. Investigators kept pressing Turner, showing up at his house, bringing him in for questioning, but no matter how many times they confronted him, he stuck to his story. He swore he had nothing to do with Lisa's murder. This dragged on for months, and for Lisa's family, it was pure agony. Not only had they suffered an unimaginable loss, but they also had to live with the torment of not knowing who had taken her life. To make things even harder, Lisa's mother was in the early stages of pregnancy at the time of the murder. She was grieving her daughter while also trying to prepare for the arrival of another child. Since Turner continued to deny any involvement, detectives decided to speak with his girlfriend and ask for a more detailed account of that night. She told them that she and her daughter had gone to a Halloween party and returned home around 7:15 p.m. When she walked in, she saw Gerald lying on the couch in his bathrobe. Right away, he told her he wasn't feeling well and just needed to rest. As she sat in the living room, he kept getting up and going to the bedroom, lying down for a moment, then coming back out just as quickly each time. He told her not to disturb him and insisted he needed to rest. She found it a little odd, but assumed he really was sick. A short while later, she and her daughter left again to visit her mother. This only added to the police's suspicions about Turner, but they still had no solid proof. That was the case until August 8, 1974, when he was brought in for yet another interrogation. This time, 9 months after the murder, something changed. Turner suddenly decided to confess, and finally told detectives what really happened that night. According to Turner, Lisa had indeed come to his house for candy, and he invited her inside. At that moment, his girlfriend and daughter were still at the Halloween party. From the very first second, he had one thing in mind: assaulting Lisa. So he took her to the bedroom and committed the crime. Afterward, he realized Lisa wasn't showing any signs of life. He panicked, claiming he never meant to kill her. Turner tried to revive her, but right then, he heard his girlfriend and daughter pulling up outside. Thinking fast, he moved Lisa's body from the bed to the bathroom connected to the bedroom. Then, he went out to the living room and lay down on the couch. As soon as his girlfriend walked in, he told her he wasn't feeling well and asked her not to bother him. Turner then went to the bedroom, hoping she wouldn't follow him, but he couldn't sit still. He was terrified that at any moment, she'd walk in and see what he had done. That's why he kept going back to the living room every few minutes. He knew that if his girlfriend decided to use the bathroom, she'd immediately see Lisa's body, and he was doing everything he could to prevent that. Soon after, his girlfriend left to visit her mother, and Turner started figuring out how to get rid of Lisa's body. He pulled socks over his hands to avoid leaving fingerprints, grabbed 2 trash bags, and stuffed Lisa's body along with her belongings inside. He then carried everything out to his car and drove to a nearby town. There, he dumped the bags by the side of the road and headed back home. By the time Lisa's family and neighbors began searching for her, Turner had already covered his tracks. Turner's confession shocked not just Lisa's family and the town's residents, but even the investigators themselves. For 9 months, they couldn't charge him because the circumstantial evidence simply wasn't enough. But then, out of nowhere, he decided to confess in vivid detail. And most importantly, he gave the police information that no innocent person could have possibly known. After his confession, Turner was arrested and the prosecution began preparing for trial. It started just a few months later, but the prosecutor faced an unexpected problem. Right before the trial began, Turner recanted his confession. He claimed the police had written it themselves and that he had only signed it because he was exhausted from their constant pressure and harassment. Despite this, there was little doubt about his guilt. Even his ex-girlfriend, who had no idea what had happened at the time, apparently believed he was responsible and testified against him in court. The prosecution also pointed to the fibers found on Lisa's clothing. They matched the bedspread in Turner's bedroom, the very place where he'd taken Lisa. But the strongest piece of evidence was still his confession. It contained far too many specific details to be fabricated. In the end, Turner was found guilty and sentenced to 38.5 years in prison. But his story didn't end there. Despite the horrific nature of his crime, Turner was released early for good behavior. He walked free in 1992 after serving just 17 years behind bars. However, he wasn't released straight back into society. Instead, he was placed in a halfway house, a transitional facility where former inmates live under regular supervision as they adjust to life outside prison. These homes are designed to help with reintegration, offering structure, support, and strict rules to reduce the risk of reoffending. Still, Turner's release sparked massive outrage. Lisa's family was devastated, and the people of Milwaukee, where Turner was relocated, were furious. The idea of such a dangerous criminal living in their community was unacceptable, so residents demanded that authorities remove him immediately. Soon city and state officials joined the public outcry. While they didn't have the power to forcibly evict Turner, they began pressuring the correction systems to overturn the decision and get him out of Milwaukee. A year after Turner was released, the correction system finally decided to send him back to prison. Their investigation revealed that the parole board had made a mistake. Turner was never supposed to be eligible for early release in the first place. Around the same time, state officials began working on a new law to prevent dangerous criminals like Turner from ever being released again. The law proposed that individuals convicted of sexual assaults who posed a high risk of reoffending wouldn't be sent back into society after serving their time. Instead, they'd be transferred to secure medical facilities and held there until doctors determined they were no longer a threat to others. This law, named after Turner himself, was passed in 1994. Authorities hoped it would block any future attempts by Turner to gain his freedom. But just a few years later, they were hit with another setback. In 1998, Turner once again applied for early release. To everyone's disbelief, the parole board refused to classify him as a dangerous sexual offender, even despite damning testimony during the hearing from Turner's ex-wife and several former girlfriends. Each of them shared similar stories. They said Turner had repeatedly abused them when they refused his advances. But even with these overwhelming testimonies, the board still wasn't convinced. In the end, Turner didn't fall under his own law and was released once again. He moved back into a halfway house, and a few months later, he nearly attacked a parole officer with a knife during a routine check. But even after that, Turner was allowed to remain free. The following year, Turner filed a lawsuit against a waste management company that had refused to hire him. At the time, he was living in Wisconsin, where laws prohibited employers from denying someone a job based solely on their criminal record. Shockingly, the court ruled in Turner's favor, and he was awarded an undisclosed amount of money from the company. This continued until 2003. Turner was still living in a halfway house with law enforcement regularly checking in on him. During one of these routine visits, officers discovered a massive collection of disturbing adult photos and videos on Turner's computer. They also found out he had been watching 3 movies about serial killers. Under the terms of his parole, Turner was strictly prohibited from possessing or viewing any such materials. As a result, he was immediately arrested and the judge decided to send him back to prison for 15 years. Lisa's family thought this would finally be the end, that Turner would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But once again, they faced another devastating twist. The parole board refused to extend his sentence, and Turner was scheduled for release in 2018. Lisa's mother refused to accept that Turner might walk free again. She launched a petition demanding to keep him behind bars. The petition quickly gathered thousands of signatures and drew nationwide attention from people who didn't want such a dangerous criminal back in society. Local and state authorities also backed the movement, and together they began working to overturn the decision regarding his release. This time, they once again invoked the law named after Turner, arguing that he should be transferred to a secure psychiatric facility instead of being set free. Naturally, Turner fought back, hiring lawyers to challenge the decision, and the legal battle dragged on for several years. Finally, in 2022, a judge made the final ruling. Turner did fall under the law that bore his name. The court determined that he posed a threat to others, and instead of being released, he was sent to a secure psychiatric facility. But even after this ruling, Turner's lawyers filed an appeal and are still fighting to overturn the decision to this day. As of now, Turner is 75 years old and remains a psychiatric facility. But despite his age, opponents of his release firmly believe he is still a threat and argue that he should never be allowed back into society under any circumstances. It's also worth noting that while Turner has refused to directly admit his guilt, he made several indirect but convincing confessions over the years. During his initial trial, right before sentencing, he walked past Lisa's mother and quietly said, "I didn't mean to do it." At one point during his time in prison, Turner even wrote a letter addressed to Lisa herself, apologizing and admitting that he had killed her. There was another moment when he let his guilt slip. Turner once said that if he hadn't committed the crime on Halloween, it wouldn't have gotten so much attention from the public and the media, and no one would have cared. Because of all this, Lisa's family knows their fight isn't over. They'll keep battling to make sure Turner never walks free again. And given his history, this latest attempt to get released probably won't be his last. A girl stepped outside the play near her home and vanished without a trace. Her disappearance sparked the biggest search operation in the country's history, but despite everyone's efforts, she was nowhere to be found. For days, there were no answers, but then investigators uncovered a series of disturbing clues that finally revealed the truth behind this dark and haunting case. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007, in a small British town called meticulously. It was a quiet, peaceful place with a population of just over 2,000 people, located far from any big cities. April was the youngest in her family, with an older brother and sister. She loved spending time with friends, riding her favorite pink bike through the streets of her town, and swimming. In 2012, when she turned 5, April started primary school. She quickly stood out as a bright and determined student, and the teachers adored her. She was also a social butterfly, making friends with other kids almost instantly. On October 1, 2012, April went to her swimming lesson at a local sports center while her parents attended a school meeting. After that, she invited her friend over, and her parents drove them home. The girls watched a cartoon together, and around 7 p.m., April wanted to go outside for a walk. At first, her mom was hesitant because it was already getting dark, but April still found her way to convince her. She had done well in school the day before, so as a reward, her mom eventually decided to let her go. She just reminded the girls not to wander too far from home, and with that, April grabbed her bike and took off. About 20 minutes later, April's mom stepped outside to call her home, but she was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in immediately. She started searching the nearby streets, hoping to spot her daughter. The neighborhood was on the outskirts of town, a small residential area with several apartment buildings. She walked around, checking behind the buildings, but there was no sign of April. Finally, she spotted April's friend and rushed over to ask if she'd seen her. And the friend's answer sent chills down her spine. The girl told her that a car had pulled up next to them. April talked to the driver, got inside, and they just drove away. Hearing this, April's mom went into full panic mode and immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at their home and spoke with April's friend first. She described the vehicle as a gray van and said the driver was a man with dark hair and a beard, wearing a green jacket and sweatpants. She had gotten a good look at him because he actually stepped out of the van and helped April climb inside. Her mother later explained that April had cerebral palsy, which made it difficult for her to get into a vehicle on her own. April's friend also mentioned something that seemed a little off. She said April got into the van on the driver's side. Right away, police realized this likely meant the vehicle had a left-hand drive. That stood out because, in the UK, most cars have the steering wheel on the right side. April's friend had simply assumed she was getting into the driver's seat, but in reality, she was probably entering the van from the passenger's side. Realizing that April had most likely been abducted, police immediately called for backup and declared it a critical incident. A massive search operation kicked off and investigators sent out an alert with details on the suspect and his van. Word of April's disappearance spread like wildfire, first through the neighborhood and then beyond. Dozens of people gathered outside her home, eager to help with the search. But at that stage, the crowd actually made things more difficult for police, who needed to go door-to-door questioning every resident. Meanwhile, people started sharing the news online, drawing even more volunteers to the area. As the night went on, hundreds of people joined the search, combing the streets alongside law enforcement. The situation was so urgent that even the local waste collection service stopped working because every single worker left their job to help look for April. Before long, the case made national headlines, news outlets picked up the story, and the police issued a public appeal, asking anyone with information to come forward. They released April's photo and a description of the suspect, and soon, tips started flooding in. Unfortunately, despite the massive effort, the search turned up nothing. Within the first few hours, they had combed through the entire town, but there was no sign of April. The next step was to search the surrounding forests and fields, but that was easier said than done. By then, it was pitch black outside, and rain had started to fall. The terrain around the town was rough and hard to navigate, and officers knew they wouldn't be able to cover much ground overnight. Still, they refused to stop. The search continued until morning, and as the sun came up, even more volunteers joined in. Some had even traveled from other towns to help. Meanwhile, police expanded their efforts, putting up missing persons alerts on billboards outside the city, hoping for any kind of lead. With the news of the case spreading across the country, police were flooded with calls, but most of the tips didn't lead anywhere. Still, that morning, one name kept coming up, a name mentioned by multiple callers. It was a local resident, 46-year-old Mark Bridger. He quickly became a person of interest for several reasons. First, he matched the suspect's description. Second, he was one of the few people in town who drove a left-hand drive vehicle. But the biggest red flag was that someone had spotted Bridger's car near April's neighborhood, right around the time she vanished. When police started digging into Mark Bridger's background, they discovered a long rap sheet, though his crimes were mostly minor to moderate. He had been arrested multiple times for assaults, thefts, and various offenses like driving without a license. Detectives started tracking him down and found a few addresses where he could be staying. They sent officers to all of them at once, but Bridger and his car were nowhere to be found. Then, just minutes later, detectives caught a break. A police helicopter spotted him walking his dog not far from home. But what really stood out was his behavior. The helicopter had been circling for nearly half an hour, and he never looked up, not even once. A short while later, a police officer approached Bridger and asked him to identify himself. He gave his name and immediately added, "I know what this is about." The officer then asked the question everyone wanted an answer to, "Where is April?" Bridger responded, "It was an accident. I hit her with my car." Right after that, he was placed under arrest and taken to the station. During the drive, he kept talking, despite the fact that the officer didn't ask any additional questions. He claimed he had no idea where April was because he had blacked out. According to him, after accidentally hitting her with his car, she was unresponsive. He panicked, put her in his vehicle, and tried to give her first aid, but nothing worked. Then he said everything just went blank for hours, and by the time he came to, April's body was gone. Bridger insisted that after realizing what had happened, he spent the entire night searching for her, wandering through the forests and fields. He also claimed that he only found out who April was that morning when he saw news reports about her disappearance on TV. Naturally, detectives weren't buying Bridger's story because there were too many inconsistencies. First, there was April's friend who had seen everything. She clearly remembered April talking to the driver and getting into the van with his help, fully conscious. But Bridger insisted he had hit her with his car and placed her inside while she was unconscious. So his version just didn't match the eyewitness account. Then there was the whole memory blackout claim. It sounded far-fetched on its own. But what made it even more suspicious was what police discovered next. Shortly after April disappeared, Bridger had shaved off his hair and beard. It looked like a clear attempt to alter his appearance and avoid being caught. Still, Bridger stuck to his story. When detectives pointed out the inconsistencies, he changed his tune slightly, now claiming he had been heavily drunk that day, which, in theory, could explain his supposed memory blackout. He also insisted that while he couldn't remember where he had put April's body, he was sure she was dead and in a safe place. No matter how hard investigators pressed him, they couldn't get the truth out of him, so they shifted their focus to his house. The moment they stepped inside, they were hit with the strong smell of cleaning products. The house was also uncomfortably hot. That's when they noticed the wood-burning stove in the living room. It had clearly been running for hours. Forensic teams collected the ashes and sent them for testing. But aside from that, there were no obvious clues. No sign of April. No belongings. Nothing. However, when forensics took a closer look, they found traces of blood, and the lab results later confirmed it was April's. Next, investigators turned their attention to Bridger's car. If his story was true, that he had accidentally hit April with his vehicle, there should have been some evidence to back it up. But there wasn't. There was no blood inside the car, no damage to the exterior, nothing that suggested an accident had even happened. Once again, his version of events didn't add up. Then came the results from the ashes in his fireplace. Forensic experts found 17 fragments of human bone, all belonging to April. Another bone fragment was also discovered in the bathroom drain. This confirmed the heartbreaking reality. April was no longer alive, but detectives didn't believe Bridger had managed to completely destroy her reality. Remains, it was far more likely that he had taken what was left and hidden it somewhere. So, despite the grim discovery, police pushed forward with their search, determined to find whatever was left. The news that April was most likely dead sent shockwaves through the community. Until that moment, people had held on to hope that she would be found alive. Now, the focus of the search had shifted. Hundreds of volunteers and police officers were no longer looking for a missing girl, but for her remains so her family could lay her to rest. By then, the search operation had grown into something massive. In fact, it would go down as the largest in the country's modern history. Alongside local volunteers, hundreds of professionals from various emergency services joined in. They searched through the most difficult terrains, rivers, forests, lakes, determined to find any trace of April. Meanwhile, detectives kept digging for evidence linking Bridger to the crime. When they examined his computer, they found something really disturbing. It was filled with illegal content involving minors. Even more sickening, he had saved photos of victims from other high-profile cases. On top of that, they found dozens of images of local children from their own town, including April and her older sister. It seemed like he had been downloading their pictures from social media. Then, investigators uncovered something even more unsettling. April's older sister revealed that just a few months before the abduction, Bridger had sent her a friend request on social media. She had mentioned it to their father, who immediately recognized the name. He had known Bridger back in the early 90s, but had lost touch with him over the years. The request struck him as odd. Why would Bridger, a grown man, want to connect with his teenage daughter? Trusting his instincts, he told her not to accept it. It's also worth mentioning that Bridger was a father himself. He had 6 children from 4 different women. Yet, at the time of April's disappearance, he lived alone. Police discovered a troubling pattern. Bridger frequently pursued relationships with women who had young children. Given the horrific evidence found on his computer, this detail took on a whole new level of significance, and only made detectives more convinced they were dealing with a predator. As police dug deeper into Bridger's background, they discovered that he never stuck to one job for long, constantly jumping between different fields of work. He also had a habit of making up stories about himself. To some people, he claimed he had served in the military and even had to change his identity for security reasons. But that was a complete lie. What made it even stranger was that he repeated this claim during police interrogations. He insisted that he had served his country, that he was a good person, and that he would never have done something like this on purpose. Between that and his strange claims about April's death, detectives started to realize they were probably dealing with a pathological liar. It didn't matter how many times his stories were proven false, he just kept sticking to them. They also learned something else supporting this theory. Bridger had told everyone he knew that his parents were dead. But in reality, they were very much alive. Another interesting detail was that Bridger had broken up with his girlfriend just days before April's abduction. People who knew him said he didn't take it well at all. He started drinking heavily and it only sent him further downhill. As police continued combing through his computer, they found something even more disturbing. Just hours before April disappeared, Bridger had messaged 3 different women, asking to meet up, but all of them turned him down. After that, he opened and watched some illegal content from his sickening collection. At this point, his guilt seemed undeniable. But there was still one major problem. April's remains were nowhere to be found. Desperate for answers, detectives repeatedly turned to the public, hoping that someone had seen Bridger or his vehicle that night. Any small lead could help them retrace his steps and finally figure out what he had done with April's body. At some point, a witness came forward with an interesting lead. He reported seeing Bridger the morning after April's abduction around 9 a.m. The man was walking along the riverbank carrying a black bag. Investigators also discovered that shortly after that, Bridger had taken his car to a repair shop. The mechanics remembered him well because he had been acting strangely. By that time, everyone in town knew about April's disappearance and emotions were running high. But Bridger talked about the case as if he were a grieving parent. He was on the verge of tears, speaking as though the missing child was his own. His reaction stood out to the workers. It was overly emotional, almost theatrical, and something about it just didn't sit right. Following this new lead, search teams focused their efforts along the river, hoping to find any trace of April. But no matter how thoroughly they combed the area, they still found nothing. Realizing that April's body might never be recovered, detectives made a difficult decision. They charged Bridger with murder, relying on the overwhelming evidence they already had. With April's blood found inside Bridger's home, police pieced together what they believed had happened. Their theory was that Bridger lured April into his car under some pretense, then took her back to his house, committed SA, and killed her. After that, he started disposing of her body. Investigators learned that Bridger had previously worked at a slaughterhouse. They suspected he might have used those skills to get rid of the body before burning parts of her remains in his fireplace. But forensic experts agreed there was no way he had gotten rid of everything, which meant some of it had to be hidden somewhere else. With the case moving forward, Bridger was placed in jail to await trial, which was set to begin in a few months. Meanwhile, search teams weren't planning to give up. Even as the weather got worse and new leads dried up, they kept searching, still hoping to find April's remains. The prosecution was confident they could secure a conviction even without a body, but they still refused to give up the search. In total, search teams scoured 60 square kilometers or 37 square miles of land, covering every possible location where April's remains could have been hidden, but they found nothing. In the end, April's parents had no choice but to bury only the small fragments recovered from Bridger's home. To honor her memory, they also placed some of her belongings inside the coffin. Hundreds of people attended her funeral, many traveling from other towns, just to say goodbye. Over the course of the search, April had become like family to an entire community, and now they had to let her go. In January 2013, 3 months after April's murder, Bridger stood before the judge and pleaded not guilty to murder, but at the same time, he admitted that he was likely responsible for her death. During the trial, he stuck to his story, claiming that he had accidentally run over April with his car, despite overwhelming evidence proving otherwise. He also insisted that he still couldn't remember where he had hidden her remains, and yet, Bridger continued to paint himself as the good guy, saying he had only wanted to help April after the so-called accident. The trial lasted until late May, and in the end, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is a pretty rare sentence in the UK. After the trial, Bridger was transferred to a new prison, where he was attacked by another inmate. He stabbed him several times with a shank, but the injuries weren't fatal. For years after his conviction, detectives kept reaching out to Bridger, hoping he'd finally tell them where April's remains were. But he never wavered. He just kept insisting he remembered nothing. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip from another inmate. According to him, Bridger had confessed, saying he had dumped April's remains in the river near his home. But investigators weren't convinced. If a bag containing human remains had been thrown into the water, it likely would have surfaced. And given that search teams had thoroughly scanned the river for miles, it seemed highly unlikely that Bridger was telling the truth. A year after his sentencing, the local government bought Bridger's house, and in November 2014, they decided to demolish it. Hundreds of locals, including April's parents, gathered to watch as the house was torn down, the very place where she had been taken from them. In 2018, April's family faced yet another heartbreaking ordeal. Her father fell seriously ill and suffered partial memory loss. When he regained consciousness, he started asking his wife why April hadn't come to visit him in the hospital. And so, she had to break the news to him all over again, telling him that their daughter was gone. In a cruel twist of fate, he was forced to relive the pain of losing April a second time. As for the search for her remains, it hasn't resumed since 2013. Police have stated that they are willing to restart the search if new information comes in. But so far, there has been no progress. It has now been over 12 years since April was taken, and detectives admit that the chances of ever finding her are slim.